Okay, I think it's recording now. So thank you, everyone. So good evening, everybody, and welcome to People and Design Fireside Chat. Like I said earlier, my name is Noel, a product designer, project and operations manager. Um, I've been doing this for the past 6 years, and I'm so glad that we are all here to understand what we are talking about. So, a lot of burning questions that people have been asking me. But before then, let me talk about what people and design is, because I saw a lot of people saw that this class was sponsored by People and Design. So, People and Design is a design community that I founded. And one of the goal is the former name was Beyond Shapes and Pixels. So the idea was to allow people to see that design goes beyond just the normal screens, the normal pixels. I've always been someone that thinking system, thinking long term, and thinking how designs can impact people, right? So I brought up the um, community for people to know that design goes more than just what you put on Figma or what you put on screen. It also goes into what uh, people use it for and how it affects the lives of people. And one of the major thing is systems and thinking, right? So uh, People and Design community has been there for a while. We started Fireside Chat early this year, and we are bringing it back with exciting topics that are not regular, not how to design a button, how to design the shapes, but how design affect the life of everybody. So recently, for those of us that have been following my journey, I've been documenting a story about how I'm able to work on design systems, right? And why I did that was because I worked with startup over the years, and one of the challenges I had was trying to build a product for startups. And if you're working with a startup that doesn't have a design structure and you're like the founding designer, it's quite difficult because you have to look for all the things that are required to start that product. So when the company wants to scale, it becomes a long-term thing. So it makes shipping slower because you have to first of all create a structure and create a balance. And that's why I started doing that. And I'm doing it for mainly startups. So it's not as robust as it should be for big organizations. So you just lane for mainly startup. And then because I worked on different sectors, fintech, health tech, edutech, hospitality, those are like my core. I decided to make it a multi-brand. So a design system that can switch between brands. So when you choose fintech, some components change, some variables, which you all are going to understand how they work. They change to fit into the fintech and health tech and whatever it changes to sector. And not just on design, it's on Figma Community Live. I'm going to share you guys with the link. I also decided to push it further by making it available for developers. So developers can actually install it using the NPM installer and work with it on their own system. So if you imagine a startup having something like that, right? They have their own design system, they have what their developer can use. I mean, they can ship product faster. And people have been asking me, what is design system? What is it about? And how does it work? For you to build it, you need to know how it works. So I spoke with Saviour, and who is our facilitator today, and he's agreed to do this. I had to beg him. Like I had to beg him. So Saviour is an amazing person and he's going to talk about himself. But for the sake of this call, I won't be wasting your time. So the next person I'm going to be calling on is Saviour. So a brief about Saviour, right? Uh, I really didn't want to do much introduction because I know he might likely want or want not. Savio is an amazing person. It's funny that I've known him for a while. He's the lead, he's one of the lead, team lead for Friends of Figma UU. For those of us that know, he's one of team lead for Friends of Figma UU. And I think that was where I met him because I'm also part of the team members, Friends of Figma Port Harcourt. And from our first meeting wasn't pleasant because we had some quarrels and everything over something that is not really a quarrel, but then we started talking, and then I discovered that okay, this guy shares an ideology that I share in terms of how people see design. So he doesn't see design the normal way, and which is something I was attracted to because the whole internet space was buzzy and there was a lot of you know things that people didn't see, the business side, the thinking side, the system side. So there's no other person that could have taken this thing better than Saviour Young. So Saviour is an amazing person. He's somebody that builds systems. Currently he's actually consulting for one of the biggest firm in Nigeria, the biggest fintech firm in Nigeria in terms of design system. I mean, I won't want to say much. If you've Googled his name, you will know what I'm talking about. So I expected everybody to have done that. I mean, if you know who is talking to you. So the next person I'm going to call up will be Saviour Young, and he will be taking out of this journey on system thinking. So with if your keyboard is not busy, I want to see some reactions, maybe a clap, a bell, something. Yeah, yeah. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. All right. Uh, let me just bring Savior in. Savior, you have the floor, please. Thank you so much for being here with us.
All right. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you clearly.
All right. Good evening, everyone. It's nice to be here. Nice to see Noel. It's been a while.
Yeah,
Um,
sure.
Noel just wanted to whine me. Sorry. I'm just there. I'm not that special, like he said. But um, once again, thank you guys for coming for today's session. I think this is the first time in a long while I've spoken, maybe like a fire chat or something. It's been a while, right? But today we'll talk about system design, design systems. How does it really work? How does it affect everything we do as designers? And this is not like just preview to just product designers. We have to look at it from a perspective of, can this affect products? Can this affect brand designers? Can this affect service designers and every other thing, right? And I'll try my best to like break it down to the barest minimum, right? So that we can understand. So give me a minute. I'm going to share my screen. Share my screen. This is the right screen. No, that's not the right screen. All right. Yeah. So when I spoke with Noel mentioned that this would be a fireside chat. So I didn't intentionally want to do like screens or slides for this. And being that it's going to be recorded, something that we can go back to it, right? So the slides are to a particular point, then we're going to have like conversations because we need to understand how these things work inherently, right? So today we're talking about system thinking, right? How connected thinking makes us better designers. How do we go into the system or to a company and make sure that we more or less create this certain level of base understanding across everything we do, right? Nua has already talked about me, right? But I'll just give like a brief intro. I'm a product designer. I've been a product designer for about 6 years of experience, 6 years so far. I transitioned from brand and marketing design down to product design. And then I currently co-lead the Friends of Power Yo community. I love music a lot, like calm, sort of music. And I was once a front-end dev, right? But I basically I don't do that anymore. So that's why it's crossed off. I currently design at Carrywise, right? So I did this my marketing strategy, but Carrywise is like a fintech app basically to help people to invest, to save better, right? So I'm one of the product designers on the team, right? So that's pretty much about me. What we are basically doing here, having a conversation around is the relationships, right? Across designs, not necessarily just components, how foundation tokens patterns work together as a system, how one decision can basically affect every single thing we do, and why systems are necessary for speed, consistency, and scale, right? So assuming that you are cool, right? That's how you are before this workshop. And then that's how you're supposed to be after this workshop. You're supposed to like have an understanding with like then have boldness to enter in the system and basically make things better. Right. So this session will be divided into like two categories. We have the system thinking, the core system thinking, and then we have like a bit of design systems. Being that design system is like a hot topic right now in the design space, seconded by AI, right? We have people talking about AI every single day. Is AI going to take our jobs? Is AI going to replace us as designers? And then we are going, if you look at the markets generally, you go to see how companies are building our products every day, and they're telling you that, oh, we use AI to do this, but we also have to make sure that our design system was up to date. So what's really this design system? What's really this system that's been built for the entire team? So I want to have like ask a random question. What do you see on the screen right now? Right, we have a screenshot of variables, we have a screenshot of components, there are level components in the system. I got them from Align UI, right? I want to know, are these, can we define this as a design system, right? I'll just like anyone to raise up their hands, like just give me your opinion. Can we define these two things as a design system? All right, so Joshua says, the thumbs up is here, yes. You can also use the chat box, right? I just want to know, can we define these two things, the variable panels and the components as a design system? All right, Joseph says he believes so. Who else? We have like about 30 something people on this call. All right, so even if we have like 5 responses, that'll be fine. I think there is more to it. Joseph says yes. Okay, so that's 3 responses. Who else? It's part of the design system. Sure, it is. Okay, that's 5. Great, great, great. Right. Um, so for those that said yes, I'm very sorry. Like, so if this was Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, you likely would have lost about 500K or a million naira by now. And for those that said that there is more to it, that's actually right, right? So a design system is a behavioral pattern across the existing system that the product holds. Now, I don't want to now talk about it like a product designer. Let's talk about it like individuals. If we have an apple, there are literally ways to eat an apple. You will not see someone use a spoon to cut an apple. True or false? Like you can use thumbs up, you can use reactions, right? You will see someone use a spoon to cut an apple, right? But basically every time you go out, you see someone use a knife, right? That is a mental model of how an apple should be cut, right? That is a mental model of how that kind of fruit should actually happen. Uh, yeah, because if you go to an orange, basically you see people peel off an orange, see people cut an orange. There are different systems to an orange, but you will not see someone throw an orange to a wall and expect it to be divided into equal parts, right? Because we have a mental model of how the system should be. Now, each of those habits, each of those precautions we take are basically part of the overall system. The system, the product at this point, as a normal person, is I have an apple, I want to eat an apple. Basically, I have my mouth, I have a knife, I have a plate, right? For those that want to have smoothies, they'll basically blend it, right? So every single thing becomes part of that system. Now, the design system is not just a collection of colors, and it's not just a collection of components. It's a collection of every single thing that happens in that system, right? It could be little things as the colors, it could be the things as typography, it could be things as behavioral patterns, right? It could be things as interaction patterns. Everything comes together to build the system as a whole. So we are looking at it from a perspective of why should this work, right? Basically, I've shown you a list of components here. Without designers, right, this is not the only way these components can appear. These components can appear in different formats, but then definitely when you're creating your user flows or you're creating your systems, you're thinking about, oh, what if this user is active? What this user is inactive? What if this user is away from the system, right? What color should I use? What element should I use? Should I use an illustration? Should I use an image? Right? Everything comes down to your thoughts, and that comes back to system thinking. So system thinking is more or less how we connect everything together, right? Depending on the each other recommendations from each element and depending on the outcome, right? Instead of thinking about one thing at the other, right? So what do I mean? I'm thinking of designing, assuming I'm designing a car rides today. We already have a primary blue, and I'm saying that okay, how should this blue be used, right? Maybe if you use a sense money, I should use blue. If a user does this, I should use blue, right? I'm thinking just solely on the color, right? Which is basically this view. I'm thinking of how I should break down the primitives, break down each color at this point in time. But when we come to system thinking, you're not just thinking for each individual element, you're thinking about every single thing that comes into play. So if I'm coming from a brand design perspective, I am thinking of, oh, if I finish this design, how will I print it? Do I export it as a PNG? Do I export it as a JPEG? Do I export it as a PDF, right? Do I even convert it to a CorelDRAW file or Illustrator file and hand it over to the system? Once you move from one layer to another, you're thinking more in systems because everything affects the business decision of the company, right? Are you guys with me? All right, thank you, Joshua. Thank you, Manuel. All right, so when we're talking about system thinking, we're thinking about the relationships that come into play, right? What is connected, right? Every part of the products that we're having at this point in time. Basically, if you are a designer, definitely you know that design is a combination of business, people, and technology generally, right? It doesn't matter what kind of design, if it's product design, brand design, environmental design, illustrations. It's a combination of business, people, and products, right? Product technology, right? Now, the idea is supposed to be that design sits at that middle and influences every decision that affects each of those panels, right? Assuming now, yeah. So assuming now, if someone says, "Oh, Saviour, we have this design. I need you to add a progress bar to this design." There are two types of designers, honestly, or there are three types of designers, in my opinion. One, the first set of designers are the ones that rush into AI, ask AI to create the flow for them, right? Just create something for them. They get that done and they submit it to their stakeholders and the rest of that, and they get it approved. That's the first type of designer. Second type of designer is the one that likely will push back to understand why we're adding a progress bar to that design, right? And the reason that happens is those people think for themselves, right? And the third type of designers are the designers that will just add it and pass, right? Number one and number three are very similar in behavior, but number two shows that he cares about the product. But even while number two cares about the product, number two can also be a flawed designer, right? Because if he doesn't understand how that progress bar affects the entire system of things, right? In terms of metrics, in terms of the behavioral pattern across the entire product, in terms of how that particular screen will affect every other part of the interface, then he's wrong, right? The idea of a design system or the idea of system, let me go with system thinking. The idea of system thinking is more or less like think across every single thing. If I add a button today, how does that affect every other part of the interface, right? I believe that there are cases where probably that screen you have two buttons and they tell you to add three buttons, right? And there are things that, for me, there are things that come to my mind, things like legibility of the text, there are things like the touch area of the text, which information is important, creating the information architecture. Because we are in a very fast-paced arena, most times those things don't matter. There's no time to break it down into bits, right? But because we are designers, and what I normally tell Noel is that designers are product people. They are not artists, we are not visual people, we are product people, right? We care about what we are pushing out. We care about how people should see that product, and we care about how they interact with it. Whether it's a flyer, whether it's a website, whether it's a physical industrial product design, right? Physical tool like your phone pouch or something. We care about it, right? And because we are product people, we also have to consider how the changes we make affect the business, right? Generally. And that's what system thinking is about. You're not thinking about just the design file and then creating the designs and you're done with that. And then voila, the design is beautiful. Or you're thinking about that if this design should go to market, right? What is the assurance that people will adopt it? What is the assurance that it makes wave in the market? What is the assurance that it's better than every other thing there, right? What is the assurance that I have pushed now this for devs. So you push probably a code, you push a PR now, and then what's the assurance that it will not break something in another place, right? That's how system thinking works. And that's why user flows, information architectures are very, very important, right? You go into the back end of things, there are you hear them talk about schemas. That schemas are very important, which is our own version of user flows, right? Right. Or further buckets, more or less, right? So we talked about the relationships are important. Dependencies, what does this element depend on? What does this function I'm going to do depend? And what happens? The consequences are important. What happens after you've made these changes, right? If I create a new button in the system today, what happens? If I change the text color, what happens? Right? The barest minimum is that we have to ensure that everybody is happy, but that's very impossible because users are very funny, right? But we have to ensure that everyone is happy to a certain degree, right? And whatever decision we make at point A, we have to consider how it affects points B and point C, right? At this stage, I'm just going to like do a bit of ramble on Figma, and I just hope you guys are going with me right through it, right? Um, so like I said, assuming someone reaches out to one of us, right? We need you to improve the onboarding, right? Probably you had 13 screens. So probably you had 13 screens. All right, give me a minute. So I'm going to add the field here. Okay. All right. Assuming you have 13 screens and the PM or your manager reaches out to you and tells you, oh, Saviour, I basically need you to reduce this screen, right? So he's giving you, at that point in time, he's giving you options. He's saying, um, yeah, he's saying, I need you to reduce the screen, right? Reduce the screens. He's also saying something else. He's probably saying, okay, maybe this CTA does not work. I need you to change the CTA at this point in time. All right. Assuming that's the case. And probably he's telling you that, oh, we need to change how the transfer flow looks like, the transfer button looks like. All right, give me a minute here. Change transfer or transfer card. Change the transfer card, right? And he also wants you more or less to improve hierarchy. Let's assume that he wants you to improve the hierarchy of the elements in the design. So at that point in time, you see that you have like four different things tied down to 13 screens. And this is very doable. But the next problem is, what if the screens are not the issue, right? So, like I said, we have like designers that need to understand. they my belief of what a product designer is someone that understands the business and understand the product as a whole. I don't mean like the product itself, but the product in terms of the field, right? So I assume I'm a product designer for fintech. I understand how fintech works. I understand how regulatory laws works. I understand how compliance work. I understand how trademarking work. I understand how branding works, right? Because it fits how I think about every single element and every single thing I create, right? Because we also have behavioral patterns, right? We also have to think in that angle. So at this point in time, right, I'm going to be thinking in like different categories. I'm going to be thinking in behavioral patterns, right? Um, I'm also going to be thinking in visual patterns. Likely, I'm also going to be thinking in regulatory laws. I'm also thinking, so if I actually was a brand designer, I'm going to be thinking in visual patterns. Yes, I'm going to be thinking layouting, which is still part of visual patterns. I'm going to be thinking in marketing campaigns. I'm going to think in messaging, right? I'm also going to think in hmm, so we have I'm going to think in strategy also. Now, these are not like our basic product design or brand design thought process. Definitely, if someone wants to design something, it goes into Figma, goes into Illustrator, goes into Photoshop, and just makes the design all true. But the thing here is that we are not we are not canvas pushers. We are human beings that need to understand other human beings, need to think about how we can also quote and unquote manipulate them. So the reason why I'm saying that is not necessarily like manipulation in a bad way, but we need to make sure people understand where we are coming from, basically sell the message properly, right? So now coming back to 13 screens, right? Or probably if I'm supposed to design a PDF, if I'm supposed to design a PDF, I will be thinking of the layout, thinking about how people should read. What surfaces am I reading that PDF on? If the PDF is on a portrait phone, how will it look? If the PDF is on a landscape phone, how will it look? If the PDF is in between the two of them, how will it look? Right? How can I adapt to that situation? And that's why we have things like responsiveness in design, right? Where we have the portrait mode, and then for tablets, you have landscape mode. People basically design for those things separately because the behavioral patterns of users, how your eyes navigate through different screens, through different surfaces, is dependent on how the system itself is built, right? So coming back to our 13 screens, my manager could tell me reduce the number of screens, maybe change the CT, improve hierarchy, and change the transfer card. And in this point, this is literally going to be a new component. So we're going to come down into our design system very soon. This is likely going to be a new component in the grand scheme of things. And this is a CTA. I should change the CTA, which means it likely will be a component or could just be a copy. So let me use a copy since you already have components in the flow, right? This could be a copy. And then my manager also said that I have to reduce the screen, right? Which likely means I have to check out my user flow all over again, right? And improve hierarchy. Hierarchy could be an issue of legibility, could be an issue of contrast, it could also be an issue of imagery direction or illustration direction, right? It could be anything on the visual parts that doesn't basically explain what that screen is about, right? But because of how we are supposed to think, we are supposed to consider everything from a base level. So I'm changing transfer card, that means I'm changing my component. I'm changing the CTA, that means I should change my copy. I should make it more welcoming to the users. I need to reduce the screen. I have to look at the user flow. When I think of the user flow, I likely will think of the information architecture. Now, if I think of the information architecture, there are other things that come into mind, right? So that's where the business understanding of your solution as a designer comes to play, right? So it makes me think, should I think of business rules? Are there any rules for investments? Are there rules for savings? If it's a social app, is there any rules for engagement? Is Twitter saying that anybody can post and buy Twitter Blue and then that we are looking to make money? So how does the business make money? what is stopping the business from making money? What is that? What is that divide that is separating or causing confusion, right? You as a designer, you're supposed to know these things, right? Like I said, still coming on the brand design part, somebody wants to print. What is the issue? Lagos printers will stress you, or Lagos printers will say that my machine has spoiled. Will you like it black and white? But because you design this in color, and if you're a designer that's okay, no problem, let's go with black and white. You have defeated the purpose of the system you've already mentally placed. There is a reason why you settle with colors. There's a reason why you know that people like blue, gives them a sense of trust, security. You know that people like red, it gives them error, it gives them excitement, right? There's a reason why you set out those behavioral patterns, those visual patterns before, right? So if you're coming back to creating your systems, you're thinking about it from that point in day, right? So if I'm reducing the screen, I'm still talking about, let me, there's going to be an API issue. I know most designers don't like to talk with people in engineering, but I am one of the few that believes that if you are a designer, you should be an engineer at some point. Not necessarily like code, but like understand how these things work, right? Remember what I said? I said that design is an intersection between business. So you're thinking money, you're thinking revenue, you're thinking compliance, you're thinking regulatory actions, you're thinking anything that can cause lawsuits to that company at that point in time. And then you're also thinking technology. So technology, you're thinking how is engineering going to work? Um, is this even doable in the grand scheme of things? Um, the truth about design is that you likely might not get everything at the first go. What I mean by everything, you might not get the visual direction correct, you might not get the flow correct. That's where attrition comes into play. But if it comes to people now, you might never get your team members right. What I mean by never get your team members right is you could be an excellent designer, but you don't have a good front end, right? I promise you, you're going to suffer, right? You're going to literally suffer at some point. Um, and you could have a, you could be a very good designer visually and not understand how backend works in terms of data spooling, data entry, data collection, about things like that. And because you don't know how those things work, you end up making flows by assumptions. You end up making decisions that you just feel like, oh, this should work, right? Based on vibes, and that happens, right? That's for product designers coming to brand designers. You are creating a print design today. I'm sorry I'm using print for a lot because I know that's where the problem always starts with. You're creating a print design today, and then you know for a fact that you should use CMYK to export this design. You say, no, no, I should always use RGB. This person will have to print it. He's not using a DI machine, or it's not using a DI machine, but he will print it perfectly. You are the one that's causing problem because you're not considering how the technology that is being used affects your design, right? At that point in time. So you still have to think about the experience of the users, right? Experience in terms of, we have the five senses. We have sight, we have smell, we have touch, we have taste. No, I think we have mind. I really hope I'm wrong, right? But the major four: sight, touch, sense, smell, right? So whatever you're building at that point in time, can my users actually touch this? If they're touching, how are they touching it? Yes, audio. Yeah, audio is the last one. Yeah. So if my users are actually touching this, how are they touching it? What is the touch zone? What area is permissible for them to use and not? If they are actually going to feel this thing, or they're going to leak it, or they're going to test it, how should I make it to be enticing? So your product decisions are based off of so many things at that point in time, even on the user flow area, right? And let's talk about user hierarchy. Now you can clearly see that at some point you are going to business thinking. A designer should think like a founder, a designer should think like a product person, a designer should think like an engineer, a designer should think like a designer. More or less, you are a super house, like you are literally everything, right? If anyone has spoken with me before, I studied engineering, maybe that's why I have a bias for most of these things. I studied computer engineering in school, but I am someone that believes that like if systems are in order, right? If everybody shares a level of thinking, everything will come into play, right? And now we've talked about like how I was going to fix the 13 screens, what's going to make me what I'm going to think of. Now we've talked about example. Let me go to components. I believe that's the base level of this class or this fireside chat we're having today. When we think about components, right? I'm going to go back to yeah. When we think about components, we are thinking about things like this. So this is a component. This is a command menu. Like I said, I got it from Align UI. The command menu has badges. It has a sub level. It has a shortcut. It has image, right? It has solid backgrounds. You can switch between image, solid backgrounds. You can switch between emojis. You can switch to illustrations. You can switch to text. You can switch to icons. You can have a top status, right? Now, the thing here is this: every component is built to serve a purpose. At this point in time, it could feel like it's a lot, right? But you are thinking about components on a higher level of responsibility. The responsibility being that it's a command menu, and the command menu is supposed to show out the information that people are supposed to access. That's fine. But when you think about design systems at this point, so now we're going down into bit of design system. We are thinking about um let me write this out. Let me copy this again. Sorry. So I don't miss it. Yeah. Okay. So we're thinking about context. We're thinking about relationships, right? We're thinking about assumptions. Um, we're thinking about consequences, right? So for me, if I am building a component today on a system level, these are the things I'm thinking about. Context. What is this component supposed to be used for? It's supposed to be used to send money. It's supposed to be used to download. It's supposed to be used to save. But what's the relationship between that element that I'm supposed to create and another element in the screen, right? What is the relationship between the transfer card and the transfer button? What is the relationship between the nav bar of the screen and the full screen itself, right? And then assumptions come into play. What if we have three nav bars? What if we have just one button? What if we push this to production and people say, okay, they want to be able to they want to be able to send money, buy airtime, maybe buy data. Assuming those are the three products for a fintech, assuming those are the three features that are supposed to launch, right? So right now the context says you should create one button, but the relationship is telling me that that button should be able to at least work for uh, buy time, buy data, send money, right? What the assumption now comes into play? What if we have six buttons, right? Will I, assuming that this is my button components that I likely will be creating for that system. So let me add a color here. Sorry, this, assuming it's a button, this button is as big as the house, right? Right. So assuming it's the button I'm going to create, and they're telling me that we need a button to send money to somebody. This is my button. I've created the component. Engineering team, pick it up, right? But they're not saying that that button should also relate with buying of airtime and buying of data. So I could say, okay, it's a button. So let me create um three new buttons, right? And then while I that's practically solved. But the next question that comes into mind now, what if I have to buy airtime, buy electricity bill, send money, buy data, maybe sporty bait for those that bet, maybe take loan and the rest of that. Like you now see that like, will I have six, seven, eight of these same kind of buttons still on that interface? On that interface, no, right? It now becomes very chaotic because already right now we're having this button, which is the primary button, assuming we call it primary button. We can have the buttons looking alike, which kind of like defeats the purpose of the term primary. It clearly, if I was having these three buttons on the screen, I'm telling the users that, oh, All of them are primary, all of them are important. Yes, all of them are important. But the truth is that in business, in business conversations, we know what we want our users to do. If a brand is today saying that our main focus is to buy airtime, and you do a button that gives them a transfer feature, and that transfer feature is primary, you have failed as a designer because the relationship between the components, the brand, and the business at that point in time is not cohesive, right? So still brings us back to system thinking. You are thinking not just in visuals, but you're thinking in business, right? So at this point in time, that's why we now have cases of, oh, this is a primary button, this is a secondary button, this is a tertiary button, and so forth, right? Most times you always just have those three kind of buttons in the design system, right? So it could just be that, oh, for a secondary button, we're going to have these formats. Uh, and then for tertiary button, we could have it like a link itself, right? And these are three kinds of buttons. The relationships are very spelled out. This is primary. So let me use a monofont so that this is primary, this is secondary, this is tertiary. Now, because the psychology of human beings is that once you see a button that has color behind, that is our primary button. That is the psychology that most people have, right? That's psychology that we have built. That is the mental model that we have built to understand that a primary button should look like this, right? So that's what brings us saying if it's not broken, don't fix it, right? Because people don't necessarily want to get confused in the interface that you are working on, right? Now, these are your buttons. So now the consequences come in with the assumption, assuming I needed to make six buttons, the assumption now comes in, can these buttons, six of them come into play? If I'm playing around this now, will all of them be primary, will all of them be secondary, all of them be tertiary, right? Or can I create the button another way? Can I have an icon instead? Can I have an icon on top, and then assuming this will now become a button, right? Can I just have an icon in the frame? Sorry. Yeah, can I just have an icon in the frame and name this button, right? Can I have an icon? Can I have an icon and a text side by side? Can I also have an icon and a text top or bottom? Could it be left? Could it be centered? And then could it also be right? Right? These are decisions that needs to be made while creating your system, right? Is there a mental model already existing? So what behavioral patterns do we have in the world that we know for buttons? Do we have left icon and button text? Do we have right icon and button text? Do we have centered? Right? So your system is built on accumulation of like every single thing that comes into parts. And then when you're creating your system, you're analytically thinking about details, right? Every details are coming to play, right? So what if I just want out of this button, there are so many instances, right? For those that did like further math in school, there's permutation and combination. And they say like, okay, let's do 5 factorial. 5 factorial is 5 times 4 times 3 times 2. That gives you the number of times possibility that thing can happen, right? So it's the same thing with design. I have one button. I could say that I want this button. Sorry. I could say that I want this button with an icon, right? I could also say I want the button without the icon, right? I could say that I want the icon alone at the center with the same color, right? I could also say that I want it to be maybe the structure of secondary or the structure of tertiary that doesn't have any field, while secondary is outline, right? Everything still brings down to the different details that you are coming to play. That's product design, brand design. I'm designing a flyer today, and I said that I want a social media flyer for sorry, yeah, for Instagram posts. Right, this is the layout and the frame that we're likely doing, and then I have my text at the top, and then I have maybe a secondary text at the bottom to be maybe 48 pixels, and then I have imagery, assuming that I have an imagery here. Now, for a system that is for a brand that is very modular, like we are sure that they will always be consistent around this. You can always build this out to a system. You can always the next question that comes in: what if this header has instead of the body copy at the bottom, the header has a the design has a header and a body copy? Without go down to the next situation. Okay, what if we don't have that? What if we just have them here at the bottom itself? Right? You are thinking of every possible state, every possible details, every possible execution that needs to be done in that system. And that is why design system takes a lot of time. And that's why system thinking is very important, right? You could always have all this can always fly in a system. Every possible combination can fly, but at the end of the day, you are supposed to define how that system should work with respect to the products, respect to your business, respect to the brand, right? So why shouldn't we have this and that? That's why we have some systems you see do's and don'ts. Don't create header and copy at this point. It is a rule, right? I'll come to talk about that when we go dig into the system, right? So at the end of the day, like what I talked about here is that we need to understand the relationship around each component or each element that needs to be built in the system to the business, the dependencies, the consequences. And then we talk about how that affects business, technology, and the scrum of things. But now the next thing we're going to talk about is the the fun part of design system for me, the variables, the tokens, the styles, right? Why do those things exist? Why do they even come to play when we are building out a system, right? And I am someone that believes that you are supposed to build a system that a 5-year-old child should understand. As basic. Basically, every product is supposed to be like that, right? So as basic as their barest minimum child should understand, right? What do I mean by that? I mean that if I am creating a component for a button, right, I need to understand every element of that button, right? And that brings us to the tokens and the variable parts of Figma. Now, I think Figma brought that like 2 years ago, right? And before that, say 2 or 3 years ago, before that, we had styles. The first time I used Figma was in 2022, right? We had styles as far back as then, and styles were a way that, oh, you want to define a particular thing. If it is text, we just come down to this panel and create a text style and say, okay, this should be H1, and then we create the style. We now go to the next one, now create and say this should be H2, and we create the style. And they always appeared at the text panel, at the styles panel. But along the line, and there was a reason for that. The reason for that was that then when we were writing code, it was always H1 on the hero page, H2 for header. Like there was already a systematic way of understanding how each of those elements operates, right? But along the line, things are evolving, right? We are seeing people say, okay, we want light mode, we want dark mode, we want to be able to go from web to mobile easily, right? If we are going with styles, it means that I have to now come and group this together and say that, okay, this styles is for web. Duplicate it and say we have mobile, duplicate it and say we have tablets and the rest of that. But we are looking for a way that life becomes easier, and that's the point of systems, right? And that brings us back to what may I call a schema, right? So we have what we call primitives in designs, right? Primitives are the raw colors. I believe that most of us already know what this is. We have primitives, and then primitives are raw colors. Like when I say raw colors, I mean like things like this: hash FFFFF, hash 0000. Those are your primitives. They don't hold any substantial meaning apart that they are colors that will be used in the system, right? And then coming down to where we are in, yeah, hex code generally, right? What we call primitives is what we call hex code, right? Yeah, you're right. Hex codes. They don't hold anything tangible, any meaning to anybody that is going to be operating on a system, right? And we now have naming conventions that come into play, right? And then people now came in and said that okay, FFF is white and this is black, right? So we have graduated from maybe low level language to mid level language. We are going higher down to assembly language that everybody understands. So we had FFFF 000, which is white and black. But if I tell you go and use white on that design, you likely will just change the background to white or change the body text to white. But the next question is, did I actually ask you to change the background to white, or did I ask you to change text to white, right? And so me, I will name this source, right? So we move from primitives to source, and then we are going to move to purpose. Now, because white and black have no grand meaning in anything we are doing right now in the system, I can't just tell anybody go into the design file, change the card to white color. I could literally have meant the text. I could literally meant the button. I could mean anything, right? So I have to be very specific in everything I do, and that's where purpose comes to play. And then that's where you now see, if you open a system today, you see things like this is an action button, or this is a sorry, or this is a text for primary, or this is a button color, right? These are purposes that exist in the system, right? Because we need to understand what job does this color actually do. So let's bring it back to this point in time, 13 screens, right? I need to change the transfer card. Assuming the transfer card was blue and I want to change it to white, I'm probably saying it's the card background that I'm changing to white, right? So you're saying that that white serves a purpose. The next question is like, what's the job that color is doing? What is the job that text is doing? And that's where we have to take time and like think about it in terms of systems, right? Not just, oh, okay, let's use white and let's use black. And also because you're likely will be sharing it with multiple people, people have to understand it. Like I said, we have behavioral patterns. People need to people need to come into your file and not get confused. If all I do today is 000FFF. If I want to make a design today, I will be very confused. I don't know if I should use FFF for the background or I should use it for if for a case like this, or I should use it for something else, right? I am I'm confused, right? Because there is no system built, there is no so we most times people just build component libraries and not give out rules, right? A design system is a combination of elements, the primitives, tokens, the variables, the functions, and the rules, the governance. The design systems are not complete without these things, right? There has to be rules that govern the system so that people don't misbehave or people always make sure that they do the right thing. And there has to be someone that governs the design system to be sure that, okay, we are making sure that we are also maintaining consistency. The idea of a product or a brand is to maintain a certain level of consistency across everything. Let's take Kuda's rebrand, for example, right? Kuda came in with the Dashing New rebrand a few days ago, and you can see that on their websites, on their brand marketing, on their app, everything remains consistent, right? So it's not a situation where the design team for marketing is doing a different thing, and design team for brand is for products is doing a different thing, right? And that is why we have these systems that we are putting in place in design system. So parentage, source, and purposes, right? The parent is the raw hex values, source is basically the name that's attached to this, and then the purpose, right? Now let's look at this button, for example. If I am building this button has a color. Sorry about this. Yeah, this button has a color. Um, this button has a text. Let me increase the weight of this so that it's visible. Yeah, this button has a text. This button has a corner radius. Right, this button has a corner radius. Um, this button has paddings. So I'm going to explain each of them one after the other. Is there anything I'm missing here? We have text, we have color, we have corner radius, we have paddings. The next thing will just be the high level things like state, um, variations, and so forth, right? So those are like the high level things, right? But let's go with this. Before I build a button, before I build a component in my design system, I'm thinking of every single thing that comes into play. I am thinking of the color that will be used at this point. I'm thinking of the padding. I'm thinking of the corner radius. I'm thinking of text. Assuming peradventure that this button is supposed to be used at a maximum of 600 pixels, I'm going to be thinking of constraints also. So I'll just add an exclamation because like it's not always a very common use case, right? I'll be thinking of constraints. Now each of these, by virtue of a component, you just think about buttons, which is fine, right? But by virtue of understanding how system works, you're thinking about the color that is defined for a primary button, the text that is used on a primary button, the corner radius for a primary button, the padding for a primary button, right? If there's any other use cases that are coming to play, everything still surrounds these basic elements, right? Anything you're going to do, if you're going to change this button to a different style, assuming that this is the secondary button that we're going to be using here, I'm going to tell you the difference is that the color here is now white. It has an outline. The first one did not have an outline. The second one had an outline. The first one had no corner radius. The second doesn't have a corner radius. The second one has a text, but it's black. The first one is white. You're still thinking in systems because once you define the system in which the elements are supposed to behave, right, you can now create usable components at every point in time so that you can have one system across everything. Not a situation where you now define like multiple things all through and that, right? Now, so we've talked about everything being connected, right? The foundation, which is the hex code, is the hex code and the scope, yeah, the source, right? The tokens come into play also. What are the tokens? The tokens are like high level language. What is this particular color or button or text supposed to perform in that system? Is it a button? Is it a button action? Is it a text? Is it anything, right? Then you now come into the components layer, which is the button itself. And now, because you are building in systems, you now see that these buttons now come into play in a full flow, right? We've placed in a full flow, which now talks about things like checkout, transfer, purchase, downloads. Every single thing brings out a thorough experience at the end of the day. Now, that experience is a combination of different components, right? And each of those things have flow, and that's where the design system come into play. Now, because we are building a system, like I said, system thinking, we also have this assumption that what if peradventure this brand wakes up today, we say from henceforth we don't want to use red, we want to use blue. Most times before, when 2019, 2020, when my friend was designing, there was a time that we he worked with a brand and they used a typeface and they
No,
sued.
it's not. It's not there. Sorry.
Sorry. Okay. So he worked with a brand and they um he used the typeface and they sued the brand. So font licensing is still a conversation that most designers don't want to have, but they should have, right? Nobody has millions and millions of naira to pay for a lawsuit, right? So that still brings down into messaging, marketing campaigns, behavioral pattern, regulatory laws, right? Are you as are you permitted to use that font? Are you permitted to use that element in your design and all that, right? There are laws to most of these things, just like free P. There are images you cannot use. without commercial license, right? On Splash, the same thing, right? That rules to most of these things, right? So before now, he had to now select each of the fonts one after the other, and now wake up and say, okay, this brand says they don't want to use Inter anymore. They want to use Montserrat. And had to select each and every of those elements, and it was so stressful. It would take in maybe another 3 weeks because it's basically like designing from scratch because you every typography is different, right? The kerning is different, the structure in which typography was created is different. So you might have to tweak it, maybe letter spacing or the line heights to favor what you're doing. Right. So these are the systems that are still built in place. So if I'm thinking of typography, now I'm thinking of line heights, I'm thinking of letter spacing, I'm thinking of the weight of the typography, right? Each of those things boils down to even a small thing like a text size, right? A text size of 64 is very simple to create. You go to Figma today, make this 64, right? And then you create a text size. It's very easy to create, right? You have 64. But for me, it's not like that because I'm thinking more in systems. I'm thinking about what's the use case of that 64. Probably that use case is header. So I'll name this header. And then for those that already know the variable panel in Figma, we have it here now. We have the variable
The weekend is not.
collections.
The weekend.
We have the variable connections, right? Uh so in this panel, we basically like creating things that help seamlessly make that shift in parallel, right? So you could just create a collection today and name the collection typography. So this is like a hint. Me and Noah are thinking we should consider like class to show people how to create like basic design systems, think how to create multi-design systems, right? I'm going to give a hint on how to even do that, right? So if I'm having typography, then I'll just create a number collection and name it maybe font size. I have the next one. I'll name it maybe line height. Name this letter spacing. Why am I doing this? I'm doing this because at any point in time, these things can change. We can wake up today and say that, okay, this zero is no longer working. Let's change it to -1. I will now have to now manually go into each of those styles and do that. And that's very stressful. Because Figma has brought out the variable panel, it's easier to map things into perspective, right? If I come down here and say this is a heading, I can map the font itself. So let me create the font. The font is a string. Our font name, I'll name it Inter. So at this point, I can map it to font name Inter. I can map this to 64, which is font size. I can map this to line height. I can map this to letter spacing, right? So I'll make font size to be 64, line height to maybe 72, letter spacing to be -5. This is it, right? Assuming because I broke it down to like the barest minimum of how the system should work. My manager says, we're rebranding today. We're no longer using Intel. We want to use Figma hands. I'll just come into the variable panel, change the fonts from Intel to Figma hands, right? Figma hands, sorry, and then say that the font size is no longer 64. Because I did not name it 64, I named it heading. It means that every time a heading should be used in that design, it bears the stem resemblance, the stem function totally. So a heading is maybe 72 with a line height of 80 or a line height of 64 and a letter spacing of 0. Right? You see, at that point in time, like these things make it easier to change, and that's where the variable panel is making things easier. And what does it help with? It helps with speed. We can make changes faster across every single thing in the design, right? It helps with consistency because once you're thinking in systems, you also want to remain consistent. Every single time a user sees a button, you should see a button. One button should not be blue, the other one is red. If it's performing the same function like primary, right? It helps with collaboration because 3, 4, 5 designers come into the system and then they can easily make changes, easily collaborate. They understand things from a basic level down to the highest level, and all this will help scale. Can you guys still hear me?
Yeah, loud and clear. We can hear you.
My headphone went off. All right. So it also helps with scale, right? And we think like this because we don't know what happens tomorrow. We don't know how to make our life. We need to always make our life easier and more efficient, right? That's the goal. Because designers, we're supposed to explore different things, right? Write code, create new designs, create new layouts, right? Explore different things. It shouldn't be a situation that every day you're fixing a button, every day you're fixing a textile in your design system. No, every day has to be a different thing, right? Now, is it possible to build a design system alone? Very, Noel is a fact to that. You can build a design system alone, right? Like you said, I consulted, not consulting at the moment. I consulted for Bamboo, an investment platform, to help with their design system, right? And it was a very beautiful experience for me because like I had to now break down everything to the barest minimum, even things like what are the width of my phone. Now, because you're thinking in systems, also you're also going to be thinking about assumptions like if I'm using an iPhone X and this is how my screen looks like, my design looks like. What happens when I'm using an iPhone 12? If that's even if that is far-fetched, what happens when I'm using an Android phone? What happens when I'm using a tablet? Right? It could always be a simple thing like, okay, when you are using a tablet, split the design into two, imagery at the left and elements at the right. It could be that way of creating the system, right? You show an example, people understand why you created that pattern, right? Because the idea of the system is supposed to help reduce decisions. Before someone wakes up tomorrow, why are we using left align? Why are we not using right align? Definitely, if you're designing for an outside country, you will not think about it like that, right? So the whole system is supposed to help you mitigate that problem, right? So without the system, you likely have an issue of how should this model look, how should this button look. But when you have the system, right, you're not thinking about how